The morning Vera stole Pip. Dr. Fan. Nora Vance was 40 meters away and watching through a spotting scope. She saw the whole thing. She saw Vera move through the outer edge of Group F with the particular low, unhurried quality that experienced primatologists learn to read as intention. She saw Vera position herself near Sable, who was nursing Pip in the shade of a sea grape tree. The infant pressed against her chest in the loose, trusting way of a newborn that has not yet learned the world contains anything to be afraid of. She saw Vera reach out with both hands and take Pip before Sable fully registered what was happening. And then she saw Vera run. What happened in the next 30 seconds was exactly what Nora's training and 7 years of field experience told her should happen. Sable screamed. The nearest adult females turned. 2 of the higher-ranking females in the group moved toward Vera with the focused, purposeful acceleration of animals responding to an infraction that the social order required them to address. The alpha female, a 12-year-old named Cass, dropped from the branch she had been feeding on and oriented toward the sound. Vera ran to the far edge of the clearing. Pip clutched against her chest and turned to face the group. Nora was already on her feet, radio in hand, running the intervention protocol in her head, the steps that research station policy required when an infant was at risk, the threshold between observation and interference that she had been trained to navigate with great care. Then Sable stopped screaming. Not gradually. Not because she was tired or because the situation had resolved. She stopped the way you stop when something changes in a way that requires you to reassess everything you thought you understood about the next 60 seconds. Sable looked at Vera. Vera looked at Sable. Pip, pressed against Vera's chest, made a small sound. Nora stood at the edge of the clearing with her radio in her hand and did not press the transmit button. The 2 high-ranking females slowed. Cass stopped entirely, 12 meters from Vera, and stood in the particular arrested posture of an animal that was receiving social signals that were not resolving into a clear instruction. The expected choreography had broken down. Everyone in Group F seemed to be waiting for someone to tell them what the script was supposed to say next. What Sable did next had no script. She sat down. Not in submission. Not in defeat. She sat down the way an animal sits when it has made a decision and is prepared to hold it. Her eyes were on Vera. Her eyes were on Pip. And after a moment, she made a sound low, brief. Not the alarm call she had been making 30 seconds ago, and not any vocalization that Nora could immediately place in her 7 years of field notes. Vera made a sound back. Pip made a sound. Cass looked at the alpha female position in the group's social geometry, which required her to respond to an infraction, and then looked at Sable, who was not presenting the behavioral signals of an animal that wanted the infraction addressed. Cass stood in the afternoon sun for a long moment. Then she climbed back into her tree and resumed eating. One by one, the other females returned to what they had been doing. Vera stayed where she was at the edge of the clearing, holding Pip, watching Sable. Sable watched back. Nora lowered her radio and wrote 1 line in her field notebook, her handwriting less steady than usual. Something is happening here that I do not have a category for. She was right. And it was only just beginning. Vera had lost her infant 4 days earlier. The birth had been difficult, a long labor that had left the infant too weak to nurse effectively in the first critical hours. By the 2nd day, it was clear the baby was not going to make it. And by the 3rd day, it was over. Nora had documented the loss in her field notes with the clinical precision that the research station required, had noted Vera's behavioral responses in the days following the searching, the carrying of the small body for a period before she finally set it down, The gradual return of normal foraging behavior that told Nora the most acute phase of grief had passed, what the field notes could not capture, and what Nora had not found language for in 7 years of watching rhesus macaques navigate loss, was the specific quality of Vera's presence in the troop in those 4 days. She was not withdrawn. She was not disruptive. She was simply present in the way of an animal still carrying something that had not resolved, still oriented toward a weight that was no longer there, still making the small automatic adjustments that nursing mothers make in their posture and movement, as if her body had not yet received the message that her mind had already processed. Vera was 31 months old, which was young for a first-time mother among rhesus macaques, young enough that some of what she had done in those 4 days, the searching, the carrying, was almost certainly driven by biological systems that had been activated for the first time and then abruptly left with nowhere to go. None of that explained what Sable did. Nothing in Nora's training explained what Sable did. Sable was 5 years old, an experienced mother, socially mid-ranking in Group F, with none of the behavioral history that might predict a willingness to tolerate interference with her infant. She had 3 older offspring in the group. She was not a particularly affiliative female. She was not known for unusual social behavior of any kind. She was known, in Nora's field notes, primarily for being consistent, predictable, a female who operated according to the social rules of rhesus macaque society without deviation or surprise. Until she sat down in that clearing and decided, by whatever process a rhesus macaque uses to decide things, that Vera could keep Pip for a while. The arrangement that developed over the following days had no precedent in the published literature that Nora could find. She spent 3 evenings searching and came up empty. The closest analogs were cases of allomothering, the common primate behavior in which non-mother females carry and care for infants temporarily, with the mother's tolerance or active facilitation. But allomothering operated within understood social parameters, between females with established affiliative relationships, and did not involve anything resembling the structured sharing that Nora was now observing. Because it was structured, that was the thing that made it impossible to dismiss as coincidence or random variation. And if you spend any time thinking about what structured means in this context, in a species that does not use written agreements or spoken negotiation, you start to appreciate how strange this actually was. By the end of the first week, a pattern had established itself with a consistency that data does not produce by accident. During the day, Pip was with Sable. Sable nursed her, carried her, kept her in the social center of the group where the density of adult females provided protection. When Pip needed something that only Sable could provide, Sable provided it. The mothering relationship during daylight hours was functionally indistinguishable from any normal mother-infant pair in the group. In the late afternoon, as the group began the gradual settling that preceded the move to sleeping trees, something shifted. Sable would move toward Vera, or Vera would move toward Sable, and there would be a brief period of proximity close enough that Pip could transfer between them, and then Pip would be with Vera for the evening and through the night. Vera did not nurse Pip. She could not, but she held her, groomed her, kept her pressed against her body through the cooler night hours, and in the morning returned her to Sable with a transaction so quiet and so practiced that by the 3rd week it was generating less social attention from the rest of the group than a normal greeting exchange. There was one morning in the 2nd week that Nora documented in more detail than the others. She had arrived at her observation post before dawn and positioned herself to watch the sleeping cluster where Vera had spent the night with Pip. When the first light reached the canopy and the group began to stir, she watched Vera groom Pip with the slow, careful attention of an animal that understands it has limited time and intends to use it well. Then Sable appeared at the edge of the sleeping cluster, and Vera looked up, and there was a pause 3 seconds, maybe 4, before Vera moved toward her and the transfer happened. Nora noted the pause in her field notebook without interpretation. She came back to it several times over the following weeks, trying to decide what to make of an animal that appears to be aware of the terms of an arrangement it had no part in negotiating. The rest of Group F had, in whatever way a troop of rhesus macaques processes an unprecedented social arrangement, decided that this was now a thing that happened. Cass had investigated it carefully in the first few days, spending time in close proximity to both females and the infant, running whatever assessment the alpha female role required her to run. Then she had apparently concluded that the arrangement was not a problem that needed solving and had returned her attention to the more pressing concerns of managing a group of 43 animals through the daily requirements of existence. The other females followed her lead. The adult males, who generally maintained careful disinterest in infant-related social dynamics that did not directly concern them, continued to maintain that disinterest. Vera's and Sable's older offspring played with Pip interchangeably, without apparent awareness that this was not a completely standard family configuration. The only member of Group F who seemed to remain uncertain about the arrangement was Vera herself. Nora noted in her field records that Vera's body language during the daily transfers carried a quality she described as careful, not anxious, not reluctant, but marked by an attentiveness that suggested she understood the terms of the arrangement and was committed to honoring them. She always returned Pip to Sable when the morning foraging began. She never attempted to extend her time with the infant beyond what the established pattern allowed. She behaved, in Nora's careful language, like a co-parent who understood the hierarchy of the arrangement and was grateful for the portion she had been given. Whether gratitude was a concept that applied to a rhesus macaque was a question Nora marked with a question mark in her field notes and left for someone else to resolve. 11 weeks into the arrangement, Sable began to wean Pip. This was developmentally appropriate. Pip was now old enough that the nutritional dependence on nursing was beginning to shift, and it changed the daytime dynamic in ways that gradually reduced Sable's functional primacy. As Pip became more mobile, more socially curious, more capable of navigating the group independently, the sharp distinction between day Pip and night Pip began to soften. By week 13, Pip was spending portions of the day with Vera as well. By week 15, the two females were moving through the group's daily range in loose association, each available to Pip as needed, neither asserting exclusive claim. Nora wrote in her monthly report to the research station, "I am documenting what appears to be a stable and mutually maintained co-parenting arrangement between two unrelated females of different social rank, initiated following an allonapping event, and sustained across 4 months without coercion, significant conflict, or apparent social cost to either party. I am aware that this sentence will require significant justification. I am prepared to provide it." The report generated 3 emails from colleagues and 1 phone call from a researcher at a university in California who said she had been working with macaques for 18 years and wanted to know what the water was like in Puerto Rico. The co-parenting arrangement continued, in modified form, until Pip was old enough to be considered a juvenile by the research station's developmental criteria. By that point, she moved through Group F with the confident, socially fluent ease of a young macaque that had been raised at the center of an unusually rich web of affiliative relationships. And the specific structure that Vera and Sable had maintained in her infancy had dissolved into the broader social fabric of the group without leaving a visible seam. Vera remained in close social proximity to Sable. This was notable because they had not been affiliative prior to the kidnapping had, in fact, been relatively socially distant in the group's network. Whatever had been established between them in those 11 weeks had persisted into something that Nora's field notes classified, carefully, as a preferred social relationship. They were not the same animals they had been before that morning in the clearing. The data was clear on that. even when the explanation was not. In the months that followed, Nora watched Vera with the particular attention she brought to animals whose behavior had outpaced her frameworks. Vera foraged well, maintained her rank, moved through Group F with the settled competence of a female in her prime. She was a normal macaque by every observable measure, except that she spent more time near Sable than social rank or proximity would predict, and except that Pip, now a juvenile, increasingly independent, still moved between the two females in a way that had no standard developmental explanation. 22 months after the morning in the clearing, Vera gave birth again. The labor was easier this time. The infant was healthy, vigorous, nursing within the first hour. Nora was in her observation position at dawn when it happened, and she documented the birth with the same systematic attention she brought to every significant event in Group F's life. What she documented next, she had to watch twice through the spotting scope to be certain she had seen correctly. Vera, in the first hour after giving birth, with her new infant in her arms and the biological processes of new motherhood running at full intensity, turned and moved towards Sable. She held the infant out, not relinquishing it, not in the transfer gesture that had become familiar over those 11 weeks with Pip. Something different, a presentation, a showing, a gesture that in human terms would have been described as wanting someone specific to be the first one to see. Sable reached out and touched the infant. A brief contact, both hands, the kind of careful tactile assessment that experienced mothers bring to newborns. Then she made a soft sound and withdrew her hands, and Vera gathered the infant back against her chest and turned away. The whole exchange lasted perhaps 20 seconds. Nora sat with her spotting scope and her field notebook and did not write anything for a while. She had spent 7 years watching Group F. She had documented births, deaths, rank changes, coalition formations, and a 4-month co-parenting arrangement that had already produced 1 paper under review and a second one in progress. She had seen things that required new language and things that required old language reconsidered. She was not certain what language this required. She was not certain it required language at all, what she eventually wrote at the bottom of the morning's field notes. After all the data and the times and the behavioral codes, was a single line that she did not include in any of the published work, but that she kept in a field notebook on a shelf in her office in the research station for the rest of her time on Cayo Santiago. She showed her. Before anything else, she showed her.